I'm always working on the next thing or the thing that becomes hot 5 years after I start doing it. So I spent quite a long time on Wall Street and financial services, telecoms, when telecoms and the computer started being merged. Then I spent time in AI before anybody even worried about AI. And then finally, I've been in crypto since just soon after smart contracts even became available.
There are a lot of Indian companies who are expanding. How do you think they can penetrate US market in much efficient and better way?
When it comes to a place like India, from the feedback I've gotten, and I do speak to a lot of founders in India, the capital markets are pretty thin and there's a huge amount of competition amongst startups. So I just find that founders in India have to work really hard just in order to get that first bar where anyone will pay attention to them.
But if you have to suggest the founders how they can impress investors if they just have like 15 minutes.
I don't really have a technique. I just really believe in my ideas. If I believe something is true, I almost think it's impossible for someone else not to believe it. So I think it's just a matter of, in my case, conviction. And that kind of thing, I just think comes from practice.
Hi, welcome to Pivot Point with Usha. Our today's guest is Paul Murphy. He has built in AI a decade earlier when most of us did not even hear about AI. He's one of the most brilliant advisors I got in touch with when I was building in tech. His journey started from Wall Street to building distributed trading systems at JPMorgan and then to build the most exciting tech ever. He is now the founder of Ormi Labs. Please welcome Paul. Welcome to this new episode where we talk about founders, investors, how everyone is building, about their failures and everything in between.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rishna.
Awesome. So let's directly dive in. So I see that every investor and, I keep speaking to them. So a lot of them, they want the founder who has done this one thing for like 10 years, right? We have seen them. If you're coming from, let's say, AI, then you should have done tech for at least 10 years. And you have got Wall Street, JPMorgan, AI, Web3, like such a varied experiences. So how do you pitch your story to an investor?
Okay, well, so first of all, it's true that I've done a lot, but there's a theme to everything I've done, which is I'm always working on the next thing or the thing that becomes hot 5 years after I start doing it. And I do spend a lot of time in each area. So I spent quite a long time on Wall Street and financial services. Then I spent quite a long time in telecoms, just when telecoms and the computer started being merged. And then I spent time in AI before anybody even worried about AI. And then finally, I've been in crypto since just soon after smart contracts even became available. So in each case, it's not 10, 15 years, but there's usually not 10, 15 years in a field by the time I'm pitching investors or working on a project.
Understood. And when we hear, companies like Wall Street, JPMorgan, when you are in those companies, like people do not think about going anywhere, right? And specifically, it takes a lot of courage to just start everything, like just leave these things, which is paying you really well, and then leaving that to start to build something from scratch. How did that happen for you?
How did that happen? It was absolutely inevitable. I have very little patience for corporate constraints. And in fact, when I was working on the project I was working on at JPMorgan, and just so that everybody understands, I led the team that developed the first distributed system at JPMorgan. It was a time when most bankers were still saying, oh, we can never use the internet, right? So because at that point they weren't interested in the internet, we had to deal with ISDN lines, lots of parallel ISDN lines between London, New York, Singapore. And I did that project under one condition, actually under three conditions. The first was that I wouldn't have to attend any corporate meetings. The second is that I would have complete control over who I hired and what kind of equipment we had. And the third was that no one on my team had to wear a suit. So this was a time when even tech people on Wall Street had to wear suits. And I wanted the best engineers. And there was no way I was going to get the best engineers if I had to, they had to put on a suit and tie every day. So so even though it was a corporate job and even though it was kind of a big deal, it was very clear that I was not part of that corporate culture and that I would very quickly move away from that.
I think it takes, because when we are just starting off in our career, if we get an opportunity like Wall Street, like I know how many people are they have this ambition, this dream of joining places like Wall Street. And
Mhm.
when you get the opportunity of actually, working there, but still have the courage to put there that you do not want the corporate meetings and all these things. People are ready to just deal with
Yeah.
whatever is given to them. So how did that happen? Like when you started, were you like after the college? What happened? How did Wall Street happen?
Well, so first of all, I was in my 20s, so I was pretty arrogant like that, and I thought I could do anything I wanted. And this was actually done, you'll be surprised to hear, on the Next Machines. That was the company that Steve Jobs started before, after he was kicked out of Apple, he started this company called Next. It was a Unix workstation, and it was at a time when the only real option was either the original Macintosh or an IBM PC. And then he came up with this, and I had been steeped in Unix technology for a long time. And the idea of having a workstation that I could afford, I could have one at home, which was incredible. Again, there just weren't many of us. So I thought, well, hey, if the bank needs this, they're just going to have to put up with my requirements. And they did. They were great about it. And they, the especially the trading desk that we helped just was amazed that we could do what we did. So
Amazing. And so you always had this dream of, working in such bigger companies, or what was your dream when you were just coming out of the college?
I tend to dream about what's in front of me. It's very odd because I think about the future a lot, but when it comes to acting, I always act with what's in front of me. So I did a stint at JP, and then I went and worked for a company that did very complex tax reporting for all the big Wall Street firms. And the CEO of that company, my boss, was HIV positive, and it was really, really tough time during the history of that disease. And the only way that people could really stay alive was making sure they took their medication on time. And at a certain point, he realized that I was interested in these sort of new technologies, and we came up with the idea of building a reminder service based on using beepers because SMS didn't exist in the US at that point. And that actually turned into a platform for clinical trials, which need very close adherence when you take medication. So that was a case. I was in financial services. This medical and telecoms use case came up, and I thought it was really interesting. So I'm half European, I'm half French, and I spent time in Europe, and in Europe they already had SMS, so I knew it was coming, right? But in the US we still had beepers, so we did beepers until we could have SMS.
Interesting. I mean, how were people's response with this? Were they adaptive, and how did you actually, till where it went? Like, did you hire people? Did it become big? What happened to that?
So in the HIV community, it was really big because it really helped a lot of people. And as I said, this was life or death, right? Like you could not miss when we crossed over into clinical trials. We actually had a really big hepatitis C project going, and we were supposed to launch with the hepatitis C drug, which was the first time that a drug like this had been introduced. And then the FDA delayed the drug by 6 months, and we had a market crash, and our funders backed out, and we lost the company. That was really heartbreaking. It was the first kind of big failure, and I learned a lot about market timing because if we had had another 6 months, we would have been absolutely fine.
When you share that the timing has to be good, and I think
Hmm.
we learn it by experiencing. But if you can suggest this to founders who are building, how they can time it right, is there any formula to it?
I don't think so. I think it depends on your personality. So in my case, since I tend to always be ahead of the curve, if I think it's too late, the prime timing is probably good. And if I think it's right around the corner, then it's usually a long way off. The company that I'm working on now fits the first category.
Yeah.
It's using a technology that I thought was outdated 5 years ago. And because of that, I think actually our timing is really good because people have finally caught up.
Interesting. And when you talk about the timing, when you said, right, are there any factors that people can look for in the industry? Like, how do you see this technology is going to come? And I need to start working on it, or maybe start think of an idea that I can build on this.
Oh, I'm just a very curious person. And so I read a lot. I keep up with what's going on. I talk to a lot of people. And I never look at a technology and think, oh, what could I build with this? How can I make money? I tend to learn about something and then I think, oh, this is a problem, and I don't think anyone's solving this, so I better do it, right? So that's usually the process for me. I don't know how usual it is. I mean, I think a lot of people now that there's kind of a founder culture. Like when I started, there was no founder culture. Nobody ever talked about startups or, what a founder does, what a VC does, et cetera. Now, I think a lot of people actually do think, oh, how am I going to make money? How can I leverage this particular thing? So that's new and that's pretty foreign to me.
Okay. So, I mean, I think when founders are actually doing it, like how you did it, you get the ideas and you talk to people. Are there any particular questions that they can ask people about so that they understand what's going to come next?
No, you look at things, you look at the world around you, and you look at what people in research are doing, what's coming up, what people are talking about. And then you develop a conviction about whether or not something is going to be important or not. And there's millions of examples of this, right? Where the press is talking about something and say, this is going to be really a big deal. And then it turns out to be absolutely, nobody cares. It has no impact on the world. And then other cases where, think people were just shocked at what happened. I think AI is a good example where, people have been working in AI since the 50s, right? And then, the progress was very, very slow. And then we had this big leap and it kind of changed everything. But people
Yeah.
who've been involved with AI always had on some level conviction that it was going to really change the world.
So if you were building something now in AI when AI is everywhere, whatever founders we talk to, everyone
Yep,
has an AI feature or an product,
sure.
right? So if you
Yep.
have to build today any AI product or anything in AI, what would that be?
Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit about my journey with AI to put some things in perspective.
Yeah.
So, in 2000, I don't even remember the year, 2012 maybe, or maybe earlier than that. I started a company. So I told you I'd done a bunch of telecoms work, and part of that work we've involved making recordings. So I had a company that made recordings for cell phones and oddly enough, for financial services, because they were regulated in Europe, you had to record your calls. So my company did that. So we ended up, and it was a cloud-based service, and we ended up all these recordings on AWS. But the recordings were kind of useless because, how are you going to find, if you have 10,000 hours of recording, how are you going to find the important one where the trader like does insider trading? Well, you can't, right? You have to be able to search these things. So we started working on speech recognition technology in order to be able to search things or in order for people to be able to find the kinds of things that seem totally normal now, but it was just no one had even considered doing that then. Um,
Yeah.
and so we started doing that, and we were using techniques that were just coming out of image recognition. And so these were the very, very early days. It was recursive neural networks, DNNs, the things that preceded large language models. And so I went through this, I think it was about 7-year journey with this. At the end of it, I was kind of convinced that the foundational models, this foundational building blocks were no value would accrue there. Now I could be completely wrong because I'm seeing, Anthropic and OpenAI, they're actually making a lot of money.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I'm taking the opposite side, which is the value is going to accrue in the way you leverage this technology, right? And I think it should basically be invisible. This technology should be just part of everything we do and part of any product. So the idea of worrying about AI and pitching AI, yeah, it's important, but it should just be at the core of everything. I'm seeing a lot of what I think are mistakes. I'm seeing people sort of put AI on top of something that already exists and think, oh, this is really amazing. But anybody can do that. It's like a magic trick. The real
Yeah.
transformation is when you start with AI and you kind of rethink everything from that perspective.
Okay. I think your speech recognition, this whole product that you did, I think it was a decade back, even when no one was thinking about AI. So you were actually doing AI even before the whole hype of the AI, right?
Oh, way before the whole hype. Yeah, yeah.
And, uh, and I know you are a person who loves to network, to talk to a lot of people. And I'm sure you would have talked to founders from all the continents. What is the major difference that you see with founders building, scaling, and raising when they are from, let's say, US, UK, or India, or different continents?
Okay, I can speak pretty knowledgeably about the UK and the US. And because I had a company based in the UK, which was this speech recognition company. And the way I wanted to distribute the software, I built an API. And then the idea was people would use this technology using an API, right? Which is sort of a modern idea.
Yep.
No one in Europe would fund it. People thought that was absolutely crazy. So I had to move the company from England to the US in order to get funded. And so the big difference really was appetite for risk. The US has way more appetite for risk. There's a lot more money in the US, of course. And so if you're trying to do something really big, like provide a speech recognition API for any developer, you had to do that in the US. So when it comes to a place like India, I think from the feedback I've gotten, and I do speak to a lot of founders in India, the capital markets are pretty thin, and there's a huge amount of competition amongst startups and engineers, and so I just find that founders in India have to work really hard, like harder than in other places, just in order to get that first bar where anyone will pay attention to them. So it's a pretty tough environment, I think.
And what about investors? What differences do you see? Like one, you said the appetite to take risk is much higher in US. So how does their investors are different from any other place?
Well, to give you a concrete example, when I was raising money for in the UK, investors would typically ask me for a 5-year business plan, right? As if I were selling, I don't know, the maple syrup to a grocery store, right? Where you could kind of project the sales and the placement on the shelf, and you had all this information so that you could actually do this, right? There was no way to do anything close to that. I mean, you could make it up, and we certainly made it up, but we were introducing a brand new technology that didn't exist, right? That no one who could predict what the uptake would be, right? And even trying to estimate the size of the market was difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody was recording phone calls except for some call centers. And the call centers were only doing it because of some compliance issue. They hardly ever went and listened to them again. And if they did, it was only because they were getting sued, right? So there's a lot of money on it. Otherwise, they'd never go back to them. So that was my experience in the UK. And when I got to the US, I started speaking to investors, and I'd literally have a 15-minute meeting sometimes with people, and they'd say, "Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's really cool. Let's try it," and they'd write a check. So completely different. It's not to say that there's no due diligence, but people work much more on gut and on possibility. So they know that most startups are going to fail, but they also know that if you have an idea that's big enough, if you succeed, they can make a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different attitude.
So, I mean, when you said the investors would hear your pitch for 15 minutes and then they'll write the check, I think then your pitch has to be like really good and impressive that convinces them what the pitch can possibly have to. And I know, I mean, it would come naturally to you because you have done it so many times over so many years. But if you have to suggest the founders on how they can impress investors, if they just have like 15 minutes.
So I don't really have a technique. I just really believe in my ideas. And I think my own belief is is infectious, right? So if I believe something is true, I almost think it's impossible for someone else not to believe it. Now, the case, because the number of investors that I've pitched and that have funded me, the number that have funded me is a very small percentage of the ones that I pitched. So it's not true. But I literally go into every meeting thinking they're going to believe this because I believe it, and it's obviously true. Yeah. So I think it's just a matter of, in my case, conviction. You also have to be prepared. You have to be ready for the obvious critiques. And that kind of thing, I just think comes from practice, right? So you get to what investors are going to object to or not believe, and so you have to be prepared for those things.
Understood. And other than AI, look, what do you think is next to AI that you see that it is going to happen, and people, if they really want to be ahead of the curve, they should start building like today?
What should they start building today? So I've listened to so many podcasts where people try to answer this question. It's a tough one. I think that people should build what they know. If you're not an expert in anything, starting with AI is like starting with, I don't know, Python or something. It's just a language, right? And AI is not quite a language, but it's a capability. You're not going to solve any problems if that's where you start from, right? You need to start with something concrete. And so you have to want to fix or solve a concrete problem. So every single thing that we do, every piece of software, every activity that isn't automated, AI can somehow be involved in making it better or automating it completely so that humans don't even have to be in the loop. The opportunity now is so huge that, yes, learn the tools, right? So it used to be you had to learn Python or Java or C or some programming language.
Yeah.
I think it's still important to be able to program, but you need to be able to get AI to program for you and just kind of
Yeah.
supervise that process. But ultimately, you want to figure out how to embed it into something in order to make that process better. And it has to be way, way better, not a little bit better. It has to be way better at the end of the day.
Yep. I think you come from a tech background and you have built AI much before. Now, when you see people get excited for smallest stuff, so-called, a lot of time they call it AI, a lot of automation things that it's just mind blowing to people, but you might see it as it was already there, something like that. So how do you feel about people
Oh,
reacting all crazy about, everything has changed with this?
well, I totally get it. My mind is blown all the time as well. So, I mean, there's no way. I don't know anyone in the field who wasn't blown away by ChatGPT, the original one 2 years ago, or probably almost 3 years ago now. I think it was 3.5, or everybody was just astonished because we crossed a limitation that made it seem more human than it ever had before. It was a very, very big leap. And now we're seeing the same thing with these agentic frameworks that are allowing many agents to work together and agents to be able to question themselves and cooperate. These things, it doesn't matter if you know how they work. They're still mind blowing. The results are absolutely incredible. So I think it's okay. I'm actually very happy when I see people get excited about AI because everybody needs to be excited about AI. Your future job depends on it. So be excited, do anything with it, and but don't ignore it. Don't pretend to be jaded. Don't pretend to think, oh, this is nothing, I can ignore it. That's just the wrong attitude.
Yeah, because I think a lot of professions, and I'm talking about lawyers and others, they are totally in opposite, and they are like, we hate AI. AI can never
Mhm,
do what we do. Like, who are
mhm,
professionals, right?
mhm.
Be it doctor or be it lawyers.
Yep.
Uh, do you also see that at your place, or is it just in India?
Oh, 100%. I actually had a conversation with a friend this morning who was telling me that she had to go to the hospital because of a problem with her liver because she was on statins to reduce cholesterol. And I said, why are you on statins? She said, well, I have high cholesterol. And I said, so? And she said, well, then my doctor told me I had to do this. And I said, have you done any research? And she said, well, how would I do research? I said, have you given your lab results to an AI and asked it? And she said, no. So I told her, I said, look, I have very high cholesterol as well, but all my other blood workup is great. And I chatted with several AIs about it. And it turns out that high cholesterol with all my other lab results, I have no additional risk. And so putting myself on statins to reduce my cholesterol would just introduce risks from the side effects of the statins. And so I don't need that. And I know that if I go to 99 doctors, 99 of them are going to tell me, you must be on statins, your cholesterol's through the roof. I've done all the necessary checks and I've chatted with the AI and I know what my risk factors are. I have them in context.
Yeah.
So doctors should be absolutely worried and they should absolutely be leveraging this. I'm not saying doctors are obsolete, but if their attitude is, oh, I hate AI, they can never do what we do,
Yeah.
they're not going to have a job in 5 years. Because no one would go to them. There's no reason, right? The only reason I would go to a doctor now is to get a prescription because the
Yeah.
regulatory framework requires me to get a prescription from a doctor that has a license. Right.
Yeah. And I think
So,
they are also hating people like us because we do research and then we tell them, what is this for, right? Because it has this and that. So now they are really scared that now people who do not have a background in medicine, they are coming and questioning us for our treatment. So I think that is
yes.
also another.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I guess I'm in the same position, right? Like anybody off the
Yeah.
street could question, some program that I've written or, some product that I've delivered. And
Yeah.
I'd have to put up with that. But I certainly don't find that threatening at all because, I've got the same tool they do.
And so right now I'm seeing we see a lot of robotics, we see a lot of deep tech, and of course AI is people all these startups raising funds. A lot of majority of market is now being deployed. A lot of capital is being deployed in this sector. And understanding from you, and you have done this fundraising a lot of times. What was the highest fundraise that you did? And how did you crack it? How did you find investors for it? If you can share, that would be really helpful.
Sure, but it's kind of embarrassing. So after AI, I got into crypto, which isn't something I don't think I've mentioned that. And during the last crypto boom, we raised a fair bit of money to launch a token. And because that was just the way to fundraise at that point. And it was silly. Literally a 10-minute conversation could result in a $500,000 check. No, no problem. So, it does, I don't think that kind of environment is going to repeat itself. And there were silly times.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the kind of times we are dealing with investors, how much
Mhm.
money they have to deploy in that particular sector, right?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. There's so many factors. But when people ask me for fundraising advice, I because every single time I go out to fundraise, it's different. And it's different because everything's changed. The market's changed, the environment's changed, people change, technology changes. So a lesson I learned 5 years ago, maybe it'll influence me now, but I tend to not let it. I try to always start from scratch. I think, okay, what are the investors looking for? What am I bringing to the table? And do these things match up given where things are right now?
Yeah. And like, do we behave differently when there are different investors, or do we try to match the personality? Like, how do you find the right investors and actually close the deal positively? Because a lot of investors would also, just say, let's get back to you in some time, or just keep you hanging. So how to, have that sort of relation that actually cracks the deal?
Yeah. So I tend to approach investors as humans as opposed to, holders of a money bag. And so I think that's critically important. The investors who leave you hanging, they're not treating you as humans. They're basically saying, I've got a deal flow, I've got lots of founders, and I'm just gonna, leave an option here just in case, Andreessen comes in as a lead, then I want to be part of that deal. Right. So then they'll say something like, well, not we'll think about it. Let's talk again in 3 months when you've made some more progress. That's the very typical way of doing it. But founders do the same thing. They just approach investors. They don't even care what the investors are like, whether they're going to be helpful to the company. They're just
Yeah.
interested in the money. And I think to me that's the wrong approach. I want investors who believe the same thing I believe, right? Because then if you run into trouble, you can go back to them and say, hey, this isn't working. Like, what do you guys think? And they won't use, they're on your side to start.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because the right kind of investors can actually take you from the point you are to next 10x or 100x. But the wrong people would just pull you back with no values aligned, right?
Correct.
So I also heard that you have sold to like companies like JPMorgan, which is sort of a big deal, right? When you are in room with such people, like I only want to understand your experience. How was it, and how someone can actually go and pitch to companies like JP Morgan?
Oh, you need to weigh in. It's pretty much impossible to cold call on these guys. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit like fundraising. You need a hook. You need to find a way and the introduction. First, you have to find the right person. That can be really difficult because these organizations are huge And it takes a long time to figure out who makes the
Yeah.
decisions, who has the incentive to make a decision, who has the incentive to change things.
Yeah.
So you need to identify that person or those people, and then you need to find a trusted way in, and that could be someone from another firm that they respect, or someone else in the firm that will say, "Hey, I think you should take a meeting with this person." I've had really good luck this is crazy, but being involved with accelerators that are sponsored by these firms. Because they're sponsoring, they have to take the meeting. Right? So that's kind of a really good way to get in the door.
Yeah.
But if you've got a product that you're trying to sell, you usually want to find a vendor who can bring you in. Right? If you're a small startup, you can't sell to a big institution because you'll never pass the necessary tests to become a vendor. Right? You just can't. You're too small. You don't have the capital reserves, et cetera, et cetera. So then you're going to have to go in through a reseller. So it's super important to establish relationships with resellers who already work with the organizations that you work with. And their incentive is obvious, right? They're going to get a percentage of whatever you sell. So,
Yeah.
if you sell something for $100, they're going to take $20. And the only thing they're providing is the conduit, but it's a very valuable conduit.
Yeah. So once you get through the door, do we take help of these people who are there for us to crack the deal down?
Did we what? Sorry? Do we?
So these people who helped us get
Hmm.
inside such
Yep.
companies, do they also help us close the deal, or is it all on us then?
That's kind of on us. Yeah. That's for unless you're going through a reseller, then sometimes the reseller will have some sort of framework and you can use their framework. In some cases, you don't even have to be involved. You're just providing a capability to a reseller. And sometimes, let's say it's a compliance thing. They just need to check a box, right? They don't care what it costs. They just need to check that box because if not, the regulators are going to get on top of them. So,
Yep.
that's one type of product. And then there's a product where they're obviously going to make more money. In that case,
Mhm.
they probably want to do a proof of concept in order to really understand how it's going to make the money. If they see
Yeah.
it's going to make them a lot of money, the barriers disappear very fast.
Okay. And I right now see a lot of companies, and I'm sure like GCCs are in place. There are a lot of Indian companies who are expanding to other countries, UK, US, and all like Australia, all other places, right? Now everyone wants to go global because it will also help them scale and reach towards profitability with higher margins, right? How do you think they can penetrate US market and USA market like in much efficient and better way?
In a fiction better way. Well, they definitely need a relationship with someone on the ground. And as a starting point, someone who already has relationships in the area that they want to work in. It's very, very hard to come in cold and build those up. You just can't do it in a visit. It depends on the markets. Americans are more willing to just look at the facts without any kind of need for an emotional tie. Europeans less so. In Europe, having a relationship is more important, and in Asia, it's even more important. So those are the kind of the orders of things. I mean, Americans can be very, very fact based. You show up and I'm coming from India. You don't know me, but I've got this product and it's 10 times better. And the American will just say, "Prove to me it's 10 times better." You prove it to them, and they'll say, "Okay, I'll buy it." Right. Whereas, someone in France may say, "Oh, yeah, I don't know. You're from India. That's okay. Are we sure we can trust you?" Right. It's just a different mentality to start with. And someone from Japan can just say, "Well, I haven't talked to you ever. Right. I've got to know you for at least a year before we can talk about business." Yeah. It's cultural, really.
So basically, if someone wants to enter UK, then they really have to be there for some time and network with people, get to know people before even pitching anything.
Yeah. It's fortunately kind of that way. Yeah.
Understood. Even for investors, is it true for investors as well?
You still need an introduction. Yeah, unless you have a hook. And sometimes you can find a hook. Like an investor may have written a blog post about exactly the thing
Yeah.
that you're developing, right? That happened to me once, where an investor basically wrote a blog post saying, "I wish this product exists," and it was the product we were developing, right? So,
Yeah.
we called the investor, and of course they took the meeting. They didn't know us, but we said, "Okay, here's your blog post. Here's what we've done." They kind of match up. And so they were
Yeah.
they were very excited. Yeah.
Understood. And so you said something, earlier that you focus on building new capabilities to help customers make more money and not saving, which usually I hear from founders that they have this solution so that they can help people save money.
Yes.
That's why I found it unusual. Can you tell me what is it about?
What I meant, so I think it's making more money is more exciting than fun. First of all, so that's as a starting point. People's emotional reaction to making more money is going to be more positive. It's going to be greater. Also, people don't love to hear that they're wasting money, right? Like if you come in and say, I'm going to save you 50% of your budget, a lot of people, especially if they're responsible for that work, are going to take that in a negative way. They're going to think, well, who are you to tell me I'm wasting 50% of my budget, right? Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. So the saving money story, I think it can help at a high level. So if you go to the CEO and say, I can save your company X amount of money, well, someone else is responsible for that job. And so the CEO may say, that's great. Go talk to Harry, right? And so the CEO may agree that this is a good idea and may even be excited about it. The problem is that when you talk to Harry, Harry may not be so excited about it. And so that's when you run into a barrier because now you have an internal person fighting against you. I've seen this
Yeah.
over and over and over. So it's a threat. Whereas if
Yeah.
if you go to Harry and say, Harry, I can make you look really good in front of your boss,
Yeah.
then it's a different relationship. Yeah. So that's what I mean by making more money as opposed to saving. Saving money is just it's hard to get people excited about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because when I think about deals that never happened or did not work out, it was
Mhm.
actually because the person was not motivated or happy about it to help you in any way
Mm.
or even to make it happen, right?
Yeah, and it's actually a disadvantage from your perspective because one of the advantages that India has is that the cost of labor is cheaper, right?
Yeah.
But that's not a great selling point for a lot of people, right? It's like, oh, we can give you engineers for half the price. And it's like, well, okay, but then what? Maybe it'll be worth it, maybe it won't. Some people get excited about that, but less and less because treating engineers as a commodity. People, especially now with AI, that's just less and less relevant.
Absolutely. Like, since you have like such a vast experience and in so many different industries, your own products, what was the biggest pivot that happened in whole of your career that
The biggest what?
the biggest pivot point for you, which changed everything for better forever?
I can't think of one. Everything I've done is kind of built on the thing before. And yes, I have changed industries, but I haven't
Yeah.
fundamentally changed what I do. I'm always trying to solve a new problem, oftentimes in a new space. So, it might seem weird going from, for instance, writing a distributed system for financial services to working on computer telecoms interfaces, right? Those are two totally different things in the technical stack. They're at very different levels. But ultimately, in both cases, we were at the frontier. We were doing something that wasn't normally done. So we didn't used to have computers managing telephone lines, right? That was a brand new idea. And it was the same thing with distributed systems, right? We had mainframes, right? Everybody used the same one, or we had PCs. The idea that you would have these workstations in different parts of the world cooperating was completely new. So there was I changed sector, but that really didn't matter because fundamentally what I was doing was the same kind of thing.
So, what would you suggest to founders when they actually start, right? And I think this happens with all of us when we are starting something, we're really excited that this
Mhm.
is gonna be the next big thing, and
Yeah.
let's build it and let's make it big. After some time, after few years, the reel just it starts dying, right? When we start questioning it, are we on the right
Mm.
path? Are we not? Should we be pivoting? Should we be changing anything about it? So, what would you suggest to such people?
I think that's a bad sign. If you get to that point, it's a bad sign. It's kind of this is Kind of like the question of, what happens in a marriage when you get kind of bored with your partner. If you're bored with the problem, you need to think about whether you're actually still approaching it the right way. It may be that I've seen this many times where founders have just kind of burnt out on the problem, if that makes sense, right? Or fallen out of love with the problem. It definitely happens. And I don't know what the right thing to do is. Probably they should get out and let someone else take over, because they're not up to the job. Because your job as a founder is to, you know, keep pushing forward until you get to a point where you've accomplished what accomplished. Founders have different, what that accomplishment is different, right? Like some founders want to get to the point where they make a lot of money. Some founders want to get to the point where they've solved the problem so that they can sort of hand it over to a professional management team to make the money, right? I'm in that later category. I'm happy to scale up to a point, but I'm not interested in scaling to, a company of thousands of people where, it becomes a problem of HR and blah blah blah. At that point, I want to hand it over. But
Understood. Because
I know other founders who, after the challenge of building the product, are really excited about the challenge of managing a lot of people. Right?
oh,
That's great,
yeah.
right? It's good for them. It's a different DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think after that point, then it becomes altogether a different game, right? Then you're
Mhm.
managing, your main thing is leadership, managing people, managing investors.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting, which is super interesting in and of itself. And I do love that kind of challenge, but only up to a certain scale.
So you love your mind peace much more than dealing with 1,000 people at one time.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I want to know
Understood.
everybody's name.
So, when a founder is building, when would you suggest is the right time when they actually start looking for investors, when they actually start to think that we need to raise now to go to the next level?
When that becomes the case,
When
it
is the right
it
time to actually think about raising investments?
it depends on the problem you're solving. Honestly, some problems can be solved without investment, so you need to raise money right away. Like if you want to build something that requires a lot of capital expenditure, right?
Yeah.
Let's say designing a new chip, right? Like, you just can't do that in your garage, right? So you need a lot of money in order to be able to get to step one. They even have a prototype. But other things where you're building some software, well, you can do that in your garage, and then you might want to raise money after you've proven that you can solve the problem. Then there's, yet another level where you don't actually want to raise money until you've already started selling it and you realize, wait a minute, if I had more money, all I need is salespeople, and then I can sell it to more people and we can make more money. So there are different stages, and they kind of line up with what you think of as the traditional VC stages, right? Like pre-seed, seed, A, B. So there are different points along that road. I don't think that a lot of companies need to raise those early rounds. Like you can skip pre-seed, you can skip seed. But I think especially now with AI, with these tools that let you accelerate all sorts of things, I think it's going to change. People haven't quite realized that yet, but I believe it's going to change.
The one thing about AI that you think that this has a huge potential, and people are not thinking about it, but they should start thinking about this.
Yes, it's fundamental. You need to understand it. You need to know how to use it. You need to know how to work with it as a coworker, as a development tool, as a management tool, just on so many different levels.
And for personally for you, what's next? And professionally and personally both.
So I'm about to start fundraising for a platform. So I'm working for a company called Ormi, and I'm one of the co-founders, and so we host subgraphs, which means that we make blockchain data available to developers. There are two things that are happening at the same time. One is more and more data is being put on blockchains. And now that we're getting very clear regulations out of the most important market, which is the US, we are seeing every single financial services firm now starting to get into DeFi and crypto in some way. They're not, a lot of them aren't really sure how, but it's going to happen, right? Well, so what this means is that a lot of instruments are going to end up on chain, which means that if you're dealing with that instrument, whether you're a financial services firm or a manufacturing firm or whatever, you're going to need that data in order to even be able to produce reports of any kind, either financial reports or operational reports. So the volumes are going to get huge. And the other thing that's happening at the same time is that more and more data access is being done by agents as opposed to humans. And agents access data in a very different pattern. First of all, they access it much faster, and they tend to ask for much more discrete amounts of data. So humans just say, "Oh yeah, give me the whole table because I'm not really sure what I'm going to need," right? Whereas
Yep.
Whereas agents are just going to say, well, I only need these two columns of data. That's all they're going to ask for, right? So it's much
Yeah.
faster, much more targeted. And honestly, no one has the infrastructure for doing this. So I'm going to be raising money in order to build out the infrastructure for this huge increase in volume for accessing blockchain data and for agent access into this data. So it's great. I'm finally marrying my two passions, the AI and the crypto. And
Yeah.
I can promise you that there will be AI at every single layer of the platform.
That sounds really amazing.
So
And I know when we talk next, you would have already raised for this platform. So all the very best for it.
thank you. Thank you very much, Ethan.
Awesome. So that was a wrap. But yeah, I mean, any final thoughts that you would like to share with the founder community that we have?
Look, I'm a pretty easy to access person. If anybody is interested in anything that I've talked about, perfectly happy for them to reach out to me either on LinkedIn or on X. In every case, my handle is PR Murphy. So I'm easy to find, and I'm happy to help. Lots of people have helped me along the way, and I'm happy to help anybody who needs help.
Awesome. That's really kind of you. So thank you so much for your time, Paul. And that
Well,
was
thank you.
amazing.
This has been a fun conversation. All right. Thanks, Isha.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
All
Paul.
right. You're welcome. Bye bye.
Bye bye.